My next example I'm going to use today um, is one I used the other day. It's from the Library of University of Michigan, and that's going to be go up to your search and just type in QUOD.LIB.UMICH.edu. Let's see if we can get a closer. I don't know if you can read that or not. But if you just type in a complete history of the Marquis de Lafayette, Major General in the Army, um, you should be able to find this document. And I pointed this out the other day, and today this is also significant because we're going to jump down to pages 160 through 162. Bear with me here. And this supports what I was just saying as far as Lafayette not only journeying to Albany, but also further north. 160 talks about him, about him being at Mount Vernon. Talks about a festival during that time period. It talks about his interactions with the Mohawk Indians and Native Indians, nations of the Indians, and that would have been the Mohawk, and some other ones, but mainly the Mohawk, since we're talking about this part of New York. It's mainly the Mohawk Indian, and it just gives some detailed information. Not so much as far as the Native Indian is concerned, but it does mention them. And it goes down to page 161, and it talks about, and I quote, this is early 1800s, this time period. In consequence of this intervention, he returned to New York on the 12th of September, where he remained 3 days previous to the continuance of the route to Albany. At the day after his arrival, the cooperative city anonymously admitted him to all the rights of citizenship and appointed a committee to present him the diploma and a gold box. So it talks about then it talks about him going from Albany up the Hudson, and then he proceeded to Fort Schuyler, where he had a talk with the Indians, and this was a Mohawk Indian, and they even gave him an Indian word of title of Kayewal, which meant father in our language. So apparently the Mohawk Indian treated him fairly, but also looked upon him with great delight, and looked upon him as an ally during this time period. So this gives some detail about his interaction with the Mohawk Indian. I don't see anything as far as him being having a negative effect toward the Mohawk, but this definitely would show that he had a considerable positive influence, not only the relationship between the Mohawk Indian, but the relationship between the Mohawk Indian and the Revolutionary War, and ultimately probably the plight of the Mohawk people, as we know that they were forced out of New York State because of Washington's, Jefferson's, Adams, and even Jackson's Indian removal policies. And you can look at that. You can look them up in history. The best place to look them up would be the Library of Congress. In the Washington papers and the Jefferson papers and Adams papers, they all talk about they don't necessarily call it an Indian removal policy, but there was most certainly one. We know Andrew Jackson had one for the Cherokee, and we know that Washington had one for the Mohawk Indian, and so that is of utmost importance to what we're talking about today. Um, a great book to read would be Barbara Alice Mann's book, George Washington's War on Native America. An excellent book. It talks about his Indian removals policies from day one, right up until them being pretty close to being exterminated and completely removed out of New York State and surrounding areas. So that's a great book. Barbara Alice Mann, George Washington's War on Native America, or Native America, I believe that's what that's called. So go down to page 162. It talks about him going to the grounds of Saratoga. So this was a little bit later on. So we know that he went to at least to Saratoga, and I had just shown you that historical marker in Hudson Falls. So he was adamantly aligned with the Revolutionary War cause, the spirit of '76, and the whole idea of a free America, and in France and the French government being linked to that. And we can see that today, even in our modern history, where you see the idea of the Statue of Liberty given to us by the French government. You see this whole idea of the French government, because they had, during the same time period as our Revolutionary War here, they had a revolution there in France as well too, and it was very similar to our Revolutionary War, but they were also fighting for their freedom. So that's where this whole idea kind of originated from, and the founders, George Washington, Jefferson, and a lot of the others, knew that, and they also keyed in on that and used that language, that idea, that mentality, whatever you want to call it, in their grounds for freeing America against the British tyranny, and lines of not only of understanding, but also of the British government wanting to dominate this part of the world. So you can read that as you're at your leisure. This just tells that he went to Saratoga, and then he proceeded to Boston, and went to Hartford, went to Watertown, went to Boston, other parts of Massachusetts, and this is copywritten. If I can get a copyright date there.